Clubhouse.
Winter is the killing season, and the hunters among us seek out the weak, the foolish. Only the very strongest of nature's creatures survive it. Winter is the time of the wolf, the time of the lion, when all nature's failures become a meal. Then spring brings new life, and God tries again.
Welcome to Pod Clubhouse's coverage of 1923, a prequel series to Yellowstone. This is Caroline.
And this is Mike. Tonight, after nearly 2 years, we are back, and we are discussing the Season 2 premiere of 1923. This episode was called The Killing Season. Tonight's episode was written by Taylor Sheridan, as they all are, and it was directed by Ben Richardson, which most of them are.
So just a community note, you guys, this has been a very long time, but please come join us back over on Facebook in the Yellowstone 1923, 1883, and the 4 Sixes discussion and news group to discuss 1923 and all of these shows that Mr. Sheridan has been putting out. We have had a whole lot to be consuming, I would say. As always, I'm always a lot nervous that Taylor is spreading himself so very thin that when we get new shows, I'm always like, please let him have enough time to really put the effort that we know he has into this particular show that we're going to be watching right now. We assume you guys have watched the show. So please, if you have not, put us on pause and go check it out, because we are not a step-by-step recap. And, we just want to not spoil you. So go watch it and come on back.
So as I mentioned in the intro, we are back. This episode, a little fun fact, because I was looking at dates, this episode aired exactly 3 days shy of the 2-year anniversary of the Season 1 finale. So the Season 1 finale airs February 26, 2023, and here we are, February 23rd, the next season premieres. I'd say for 8-episode seasons, the production time in between seasons on television has gotten a little crazy.
It has. And I mean, there's a lot going on in Hollywood. And certainly we know there's been strikes and writing issues and so many different things that have been going on. So we're all very patient and very respectful of this process. But man, it has been a very long time as an audience member. So where did we leave off with everyone, Mike? We totally need to talk about where we were and just have like a moment of like, oh, yeah.
So Kara and Jacob, they are pretty much in the same place they are now. The very last thing with them was Whitfield finally actually had seen Jacob face to face. He had driven out to the ranch and basically told him that I made your first payment on your property tax, which you have not yet done. The year is almost over. And if you do not pay off the property tax, well, I get possession of your house and the ranch, because that's how the property taxes laws work in Montana in 1923.
Actually, they pretty much still work that way now. If you go and pay somebody's property tax, you can very well take their land.
That is pretty crazy. And winter had settled into the Yellowstone by the time that episode aired. So I'm thinking we were like maybe in November-ish, I think, at the end of season 1. And we are in the new year now, so I'm thinking somewhere between 2 to 3 months have passed. I think we're either somewhere in January, not much later than February, would be my guess. No one actually stamps that, but we know we're in the new year because the taxes got paid. That's how the episode begins, really, with Jacob and Kara's letter to Spencer, which we'll get to in a second. So, yeah, I think we've time jumped about 2 to 3 months. The fact that Alex isn't showing yet makes me feel more like 2 months than 3 months. But we're still locked in the grips of winter in Montana. Speaking of, Spencer and Alex had a very traumatic and dramatic parting of the ways at the end of season 1 of 1923, because Spencer, really just got out of the way of Arthur the Putz throwing himself overboard. Because acting in self-defense, he wasn't killed on the ship, but he was put off of the RMS Majestic, which was the ship that they were sailing, him and Alex together. He was put off in Italy and, probably more like Sicily. And Alex was kept on ship, forced to return to her parents, in England. That's where we left them. The last thing was Alex waving the letters saying that she has them, that she will meet him in Montana. and that they will be reunited. And we really didn't know what was going to go on with them at that point. And Alex, we had thought was pregnant. There were two very clear signs that indicated she was pregnant in that episode, but it was not confirmed in any kind of way. We get confirmation when this episode picks up that she is in fact pregnant, but not yet showing. Jack and Elizabeth, when they ended the season, they had just had a very traumatic miscarriage. Elizabeth was blaming herself, calling herself kind of a failure. What use is she? What value is she? Jack had a very nice message to her, really drawing on the inspiration from his aunt and saying, look at Kara. She didn't have children, and look how much she has done and how much value she has and how important she is to our family. I'll tell you right now, don't expect any kind of follow-up on that because we got none. There was no talk of a miscarriage in this episode. These two have one scene together in the middle of a montage dinner scene. They have no other interaction. They don't speak to each other. So you're not getting anything on the Jack and Elizabeth front at this point. Tiona and her family, you'll remember Tiona had finally escaped from the abusive school. She had finally been reunited with her dad, Runs His Horse, and they also had Pete, which was the son of Hank, who was killed at the end of 1923 season 1. But he now is traveling with Tiona and her dad. When we last saw them, they had just reached the Wyoming border, and they were headed south to the Washita River to blend into the Comanche people living down there. For those geography minded, the Washita River is basically right on the border of Oklahoma and Texas. It ends in the Red River at what is now referred to as Lake Texoma. As we're going to learn in this episode, Tiona and her dad and Pete completely miss Oklahoma, and they miss the Washita River, and they wind up in the panhandle of Texas, so they are not in the Oklahoma territory, though the Marshalls and Father Renaud are in the Oklahoma territory, which they were going to get on the train and head south and then go into the Comanche lands to find Tiona and I guess literally drag her back kicking and screaming. We pick up with them, which we'll talk about in our villains section. Whitfield is a bad man. He was a bad man, remains a bad man, and we don't really have to talk too much about him. Banner, bad man, still a bad man, though I think they may be doing something with Banner that I want to talk to you about when we get there. The other big character that we need to talk about is Zane. You'll recall at the end of 1923, Zane had gotten Jacob's permission to go visit his family for a day while they were in Bozeman. We see him having a lovely dinner with Alice, his Asian wife, and their 2 children. They had to talk about the radio towers coming. It was a very wholesome moment. And then the law came, presumably because of Whitfield putting them up to it, and dragged Alice off, did something with the kids. We don't know where they are. And then they beat the ever-loving snot out of Zane. When the episode ended, we didn't know if he was dead. We didn't know what his status was. And we catch up a little bit with them in this episode, or at least we hear about the state of them in this episode. So I think that's everyone. Did I miss anyone? I think I got everyone.
I think you got everybody. I feel like we definitely need to bring attention to the Cole Brings Plenty passing away and the very nice memoriam that they had for him at the beginning of this episode. It was super sad to see that, and really sad to see him acting knowing that, he's not going to be with us for very long. We will have a replacement coming in, from what I understand. We saw him in American Primeval on Netflix. Is that correct to you? Yeah?
Yep. Jeremy Gauna, he's the one who's playing Pete in this episode. So he began playing Pete. They recast him in the in-between. So they recast the character of Pete in the in-between. And so the Pete that we saw tonight is the new actor, Jeremy Gauna. Gauna. I'm going to say Gauna. He is a Native American, and he is going to be taking up the role.
So let's talk about some episode themes. What did we see going on? I mean, I definitely felt like this winter was going to be insane. I know that there's this concept of a blizzard coming that's sort of been like just this foreboding thing that is coming. There's been a lot of talk even throughout, where it's been like, when winter comes, we all need to be like hunkering down kind of thing. It's been sprinkled throughout. I felt like these winters, I barely know how these people survive anyway, but when these winters come along, it just feels like maddening. Like, I really don't know how they get through it.
I don't know how to get through it, and especially when the ranch has been reduced down to such a limited state. It's not even like it was a robust time going into the winter. We think about those who know winter is coming, to echo the Stark's words from Game of Thrones. They gather, they plan, they store. The Yellowstone is on its knees right now. It doesn't have the resources to plan, to gather, to store. Let's listen to Kara's letter to Spencer. It really kind of sets up, I think we heard it in Elsa's voiceover at the beginning of this episode, the intro to this episode, and she ends the episode talking about the killing season. Kara sets up the episode at the beginning, so it's actually kind of a nice bookend. These ancestors and descendants of each other, or relatives of each other, kind of bookending, talking about winter and the killing season. Let's listen to Kara tell us about where we are.
Dear Spencer, we have sold the last of our herd, keeping only 4 bulls and 100 heifers. The seeds with which you must rebuild the ranch, the trickery and laws drafted by loan sharks have stripped from us. The road to Bozeman is snowed over now, passable only on horseback. Our movement is restricted to the lodge and the pastures around the barn until spring. We dare not kill a beef, so the men hunt. Gone are the great feasts of summer. It is stews and stale bread and the bland fuel of sustenance. Like the bear, we hibernate, impatiently awaiting spring and your return.
I don't know if you can count as a plan, hold our breath and wait for spring and you to come home, Spencer.
It's certainly a thin plan, I want to say, because I mean, we need something so much more. And I love that we think that Spencer can save the day. I want him to be able to save the day. However, I have such faith in Kara and Jacob that, like, when I see them struggling so hard, I'm like, what is he going to bring to the table that is suddenly going to just clear up everything?
Youth?
Oh, okay. But like, what else? Because there's got to be... It's like, we know he's a fighter. Okay. We know that he is physically a fighter, but I haven't seen anything really about like negotiation skills, or he's so savvy with business or whatever, that like somehow he's going to bring something. But I have full faith that Spencer's got a whole bag of tricks, but he hasn't really given us a glimpse of what all these tricks could possibly be.
I feel like the themes from season 1 about needing him to come home, and if you recall, Jacob talking to Jack about how Jack can't lead yet. It seems to me that they feel Spencer's main thing he brings to the table is violence, is fight and youth. People look at Jacob and they respect him and they know he is a tiger, but he is an aging tiger. I mean, they didn't touch upon it in this episode, but at the end of season 1, he couldn't feel his fingers. He had gone through the recovery of being shot to death, literally Swiss cheesed by Banner and his men in that ambush that killed John and Elizabeth's father and the other people. And then coming out of the recovery, that he couldn't even feel his fingers. He talked about going up into the mountains to die to Kara. So he's a lion, but he is an aging lion. And I think they see him as a lion they need, who is young and can fight and do the fight that's necessary. I think Kara and Jacob feel that they're too old. The mind is willing, but the flesh is weak, or flesh is aged.
Yeah, it's just Whitfield's not just going to be a bar fight, and that's the kind of stuff we've seen Spencer win. So I'm sort of like, Spencer, what are you going to do when you get here? What do you have? What is this big bag that you have that you're going to be able to just suddenly fix everything? I hope that he's got something else besides a fist fight in him, because that's not going to be enough with Whitfield.
Well, hopefully what he has is Alex, if nothing else, right? She's going to bring some savvy and connections and stature. I mean, her stature will outmatch Whitfield's instantly. I mean, literally bringing the peerage into Montana.
So long as she still has it, because, we don't know where she exactly stands.
That's
so
true. But even the threat of it, right? I mean, communication being what it is, even the threat of it may be at least enough bluff to get them going. But I really think Spencer's, I again, just to circle back, I think they just need him to fight, because before Whitfield really revealed himself, so much of their conflict and struggles in season 1 were literally violent struggles. It was people coming to take our land. Banner and his men.
Physical manpower.
Literally ambushing us in an open plain with Tommy guns. And I think that's really what they were directing Spencer at, that we need you to bring the war home because the war has come home.
I'll say for my own self, like when it comes to my own family, like I definitely feel, when everybody comes home, if you will, my siblings and whatnot, and we're all sort of together, like that, there is strength in numbers. And I don't in any way, feel like Spencer's not going to be bringing in this huge breath of fresh air, of just being like ready for the fight. Whereas all of these people who have been on the ranch for so long now, I mean, they've really been beaten down. I mean, we've had so much go on for them that Spencer coming in, just having that energy, just having that, that injection of like, we can do this, let's do this. Maybe that will be enough to even just embolden everybody else who's there.
So just to recap what we heard there, and I think it was interesting in the clip from Kara, she says that they have sold the entirety of the herd in order to pay the taxes to keep Whitfield at bay for now. They're down to 4 bulls and 100 heifers. Now, if you think of like where Kevin Costner, John Dutton's Yellowstone was, I mean, they had thousands and thousands and thousands of herd, which they also ended up having to sell and move and get rid of in order to prepare to pay taxes. So it's funny, a century apart, and it's all very cyclical. But the line that Kara says in that letter she's writing to Spencer is 4 bulls, 100 heifers, the seeds with which you need to rebuild the ranch. That's a lot of pressure to put on a guy who has been off at war and not running a ranch for how many years? And also no mention of Jack at all in there either. Kara is putting the entire future, not we will rebuild together, not you and your brother will rebuild.
It's a lot of pressure on this guy's shoulders. I'm feeling for him because this is so much. And it's not like he's coming without his own baggage. Not only does he have this distance with his wife, he's got this entire mess going on with how to get Alex back, but then he has his own PTSD from the war, from everything that he's seen. All this stuff in his own little life, he has had a lot going on. So he's not coming in like Hercules, like just suddenly fresh and ready for a big fight,
Not in the best mental state, to say nothing of the fact that having his brand new wife ripped from him, and literally thrown off of a boat from him. So yeah, but maybe he's going to come in with some piss and vinegar that they need desperately. I don't know. You ask a very good question of what is the other side of the ledger. He has the tools clearly to go toe to toe with Banner and Banner's men. What does he have to go toe to toe with Whitfield? Right.
Yeah. Where's the mental like fight, and like where are we going to be with that? And maybe he's going to have some amazing skill sets that are going to just blow us over, but we really haven't seen that side of him quite yet. I do have to say that as an actor, Brandon Sklenar looks much more built this season. Like his shoulders are really filled out. He really like looks like they're trying to kind of physically give us that hero look, so that when he comes in, he's not emaciated. He doesn't look all spindly. He looks good. So
I wrote in my notes. I noticed that looking jacked, working in that boiler room. If that's what you need to do, I need to go get myself on an Italian merchant ship and go.
I definitely think that looked like real hard work what they were doing.
So what's the significance, do you think, of the mountain lion? Or is it just all bets are off in winter? Is it just simple as I need to eat and you look tasty, so and your porch looks warm?
I think I took the mountain lion to represent nature and every living thing's desperation right now. That's what I felt. I felt like he was the symbol of like this wild thing who should be able to take care of himself and should be able to be out here thriving in the wilderness, is being, driven to coming to civilization, driven to coming and laying on a human being's porch, looking for food, you know, in a place that he shouldn't be. You know, he should be up in the mountains and everything. So for me, it was just this symbolism of desperation and of the kind of sickness that is also sort of going on in nature right now that was sort of touched upon in terms of like none of the animals seem healthy and like they're doing well, whether it's the cattle or the sheep or now the wild animals. Everybody seems out of sorts. That's my overall vibe.
I think that's right. And I think it's not a coincidence that Luca and Spencer on the boat also get around to talking about lions. And the fact that Spencer talks about the fact that they have lions at home, but they don't mess with the horses and the cattle. And presumably he means include in there the people, because he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that the lion literally is at the door in literal and metaphorical senses.
Yeah, for sure.
Why are Jacob and the remaining men headed out to Bozeman in the snow? They're going to town because the start of the miscegenation. I was practicing how to say that word.
Such a rough one to say.
They were heading to the miscegenation trial. So we understand from the speakeasy scene with the sheriff and Jacob that Zane is still pretty messed up. They've got him walking around, but his head still isn't right. So presumably he's in a hospital somewhere in Bozeman following his beating. We don't know where the kids are. There's a mention that he hasn't been able to see his kids, Zane, nor see Alice. But Alice, we know where she is. She's the one on trial. That's what they're heading for. It's Alice's trial because she will not reveal the name of the preacher who performed their marriage, which is illegal under the anti-miscegenation laws, which we talked about last season, at the end of last season. She's on trial, and unless she gives up the name of the preacher, she's going to go back to jail. The sheriff lets us know that the marriage is definitely void already, but also reveals how particular and how racist, really, and how political this law is. The Judge Garrett, who's going to be presiding over the trial, is married to a Crow woman. One of the lawmakers, that drafted the law excluded Spanish or Mexican women from the law because the lawmaker met a side piece in Texas on a hunting trip in Texas. So I don't even know what to say. And the fact that these laws stayed on the books for so long in different parts of the country is, man, where have we come in 100 years? I don't really know. What's your guess? Does Zane live? He's still in the credits. He's still in the main cast credits, and Alice is not. But what's your guess here? Does Alice get out? Do they get to be together? Does Zane live? Do we get to see Zane return to work? How is he changed by this?
I think that this is going to be a gigantic blow for Zane and his entire family, obviously, mentally, physically, emotionally, everything across the board. The way that they've been separated, the way that, their whole life has just been blown up here. I am very, very hopeful that somehow the fact that we're working with, like, how can we talk to the judge perhaps, and Jacob is on the scene and there is, talk like maybe there is something to be done here. So I have some hope for this family. I do not feel like we're going to leave them high and dry. I do think that we're going to deal with them, and hopefully there can be some sort of outcome. I feel like there's been a lot of conversation within Yellowstone across the board throughout all of the series that we've been following, where you don't necessarily have a winner at the end of different situations, right? Like it's kind of like the best we can make of this situation.
Right.
And so that's how I feel about them. And even though that sounds kind of, pretty sad, it's almost as hopeful as you can possibly be during this time. Because, even if you just have a sliver of hope, or you've got some people willing to fight for you on your side, you are in so much better shape than the majority of the people.
Just in case anyone did not go back and re-listen to our episodes from season 1, and also how dare you, the Anti-Miscegenation Act of 1909 prohibited white people from marrying African Americans, Chinese, and Japanese people, or people of that ancestry. It was upheld by the Montana Supreme Court in 1942 and was not repealed until 1953. Which is a full 30 years or 29 years now from where we are in the show. Yeah, do we get to keep calling this show 1923? Do we call it 1924? Do we call it 1923 plus 1?
I think we're going to stick with 1923 and then some.
I like that, 1923 plus.
And
like Paramount, like Paramount Plus. It's kind of like the same idea.
How are you feeling about Zane's family? I mean, are you feeling like they've got a shot here, or do you feel like this is too bad?
I don't think Alice makes it. I think Zane gets better. I mean, the sheriff even says, I think it's his broken heart more than anything to do with his head. So I think he gets right just in time to see Alice hauled off to prison. I think if there is a bright spot at all, perhaps they let the children come live on the ranch. That Jacob can, kind of how he did Rip and how Rip and Beth did the boy, you know, at the end of Yellowstone. Perhaps they take him on as like a Lloyd-esque kind of, you know, ranch hand. That maybe Zane can't like declare them as his children, but you know, they don't put them in a foster home, that maybe the Duttons can raise them essentially. Because with the marriage being made null and void, Zane and Alice, the show has told us they can't be together, or at least not in a way where they can look over their shoulder, and especially with someone like
Definitely
Whitfield.
Not publicly, for sure. They can't.
And I mean, they weren't being public either. Remember, Whitfield had one of his goons looking in their window.
I remember.
The child went to, remember, after she found them in the shower together, mom and dad in the shower together, went to bed because she had reported someone was looking in her window. I mean, these are unscrupulous men in Whitfield's employ. Let's end on a happy-ish kind of note, or at least a sweet note, with Kara and Jacob. I don't know about you, these two remain the most wholesome part of the show. Their love shines in a way that so many other parts of the show are bleak or downright violent, maybe unnecessarily so, or disturbing, maybe unnecessarily so. But when Kara told Jacob that at least the worrying would be of my own choosing, come on, man. Like, who is not using these two as goals for a relationship?
You know, it makes me wonder so much because of thinking about this episode as a whole. And, you know, I'm going to be real honest. We didn't do this at the top of our conversation, but this was a rough episode. This was a really difficult episode for me. There was a lot of really abusive, terrible, violent moments throughout. I mean, in the first 15, 20 minutes, there was so much violence and abuse that for me, coming back to the show, sort of excited about seeing all our characters again, Kara and Jacob make me happy and make me feel like, okay, I can go through any struggle with these two because there's something about them that is so solid and so loving and dedicated and loyal to this entire situation that they always lift me up. I'm worried in my guts that I'm like, how is this show going to continue on with such this wholesome storyline that we have over on one side? And then these threads we've got going on, whether it be with Whitfield and the prostitutes, or we've got Spencer on the boat and the rapist, and we've got, you know, the violence with the preachers and the priests and everything that's going on. It just feels like, I asked you like offline, I was like, I wonder if Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren had any idea what the other storylines were going to be, because you know, Harrison is not the type of actor who tends to be in a hard R with, you know, like women being abused and rapes and all this stuff. I mean, he tends to be in sort of those more mainstream, you know, yes, there's going to be a punch thrown or whatever, but you hardly ever even see blood in like Indiana Jones and stuff like that. Like there's a lot going on here that made me wonder about those two actors and what they thought. And you know what, the thing that I am jonesing for so bad right now? I need to see an interview with Timothy Dalton about what the hell he thinks is going on with the storyline going on with Whitfield. I need to know his take on it as an actor. We need
to go get him. We need to go find Timothy
and bring him on. I need to talk with him because there is a part of me that just wants to be like, I need your point of view on this, because I know all of you guys out there, all of you audience members, you're as voracious as we are about wanting to get information about behind the scenes and what do other audience members think and everything. And this episode got a lot of pushback in terms of the amount of violence and abuse. And I am so curious about some of these older actors, Harrison, Helen, Timothy. What do you guys think about what is going on when you're not necessarily on screen, or for, you know, Timothy? What are you doing with these people? There's so much going on that this was tough. I saw a lot of people coming back and being like, I don't know if I can keep watching this, if this is going to be like the level of violence and abuse. Like, some of this just doesn't feel necessary to the plot. And I'm starting to feel worried about that. So as we go through these next sections, we're probably going to be a little lighter on some of that abuse and some of that violence because you all saw it and we don't need to rub salt in wounds here. So that's how I feel about it. What do you think about this? How wholesome they're keeping Kara and Jacob versus these other storylines that are really wildly off the rails?
I think until Alex and Spencer are reunited again, I think Kara and Jacob are the only patch of sunlight in this show. And I think that's by design. I think this is a bleak time. The winter is just a background, but I don't think it's going to be much better in the spring. I think we intentionally are being made to feel that the only solace you're going to get in an episode pretty much is Jacob and Kara. Yes, there were sweet moments with Tiona and Pete, and we know Alex and Spencer, if and when they make their way back to each other, will be tender, sweet moments. But even Elizabeth and Jack, they didn't speak in this episode. There was no goodbye kiss. We saw Jacob and Kara kiss goodbye and nuzzle noses before he got on the horse for Bozeman. There was none of that with Jack and Elizabeth coming out of their miscarriage storyline. That changes people. The Whitfield stuff is he just represents a cloud just pulling and pulling in and darkening in. Now, I struggled with the violence and the abuse last year. Particularly, I found really hard to stomach the Tiona and the Christian school storylines and the amount of abuse, which was stark and was visceral. But it was true. And I think I give credit to Taylor Sheridan for putting a light on. I still see it today in Reddit groups and Facebook groups and elsewhere online about why did they do that with the Christian school and the abuse? And then people having to say, because that's what happened and no one knows that history in the United States and in Canada. And so I could stomach it because narratively, I think it was important to tell a part of real history. We get Whitfield as a bad guy. We get it. We get it. We get that he gets his rocks off not on sex. This is not about sex at all. You will never find two less prudish people than Caroline and myself. Right. This is about power and domination and abuse of that. That's all this is. Because he can. That's it. Because he can. And he wants others to know he is in charge and he is the one with the power. We get it. We don't need to see it or show us other ways. I really don't want to keep seeing it. I mean, I've got to tell you, the scene when they're in the closet, when the prostitutes are in the closet, and I really had a moment of being like, this has gone way too far for me. Like, I would never choose to watch something that depicted this for me. And so, like, I need the prostitution storyline to matter. It cannot just be to show us that he's a messed up person, because that was accomplished many episodes ago. So if these two women do not come back into play and somehow are part of his downfall, I am going to be extremely disappointed as an audience member that we had to go through all of this abuse, because it only is okay by me if we are setting a foundation for what would get these women to a place of being willing to kill him, set him up in some sort of trap, do something. If that's the point, okay, I can hang in here. But if we're just playing around on the side and showing this as just like color for his personality, I am struggling on this. Yeah, I don't need any more domination snuff film porn to understand Whitfield is a bad guy. You know, show us conniving with trying to take the land this and that way. You give us Jenkins level, and I even like Dan Jenkins in Yellowstone. I don't like the character, but give me a bad guy like that, or like Markwood Equities. We don't need this. You have made the point. You made the point already last season, and we didn't need it last season as much as we had it.
And one of the things that keeps getting brought up, I'm okay with them continuing to try to shed light on the females role during this time in terms of like, look what's going on with Alice. Look what's going on with these prostitutes. Look what's going on with Elizabeth. Look what's going on with Alex. There's so few choices and they have so few resources that, you know, when people, I've seen lots of stuff online that's like, why don't the prostitutes just run away? Why can't they just do this, that, or the other? Yes, that all makes sense. But like, we have to remember that, like, one of the comments that I saw that really like struck me was that, you know, the prostitutes' bodies are what they're selling, right? So if he is like scarring them and bruising them and creating actual like cuts and things on their bodies, they're actually going to not be able to make a living because no one wants to buy that person, which sounds terrible to say, but it's like that part of the story is still in there. That this is what these women have to do to get by. And he is like messing that up even. Does that sound so crazy? But it's true.
I think I have an even bleaker view. These two don't live. These two just wind up in a hole somewhere. Here's another issue I have with this. Narratively...
So then why don't we just get to that part? I swear.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Several months later, there's no way someone like Whitfield, how he is built psychologically, he would be still with these two. It
seems like his attention span would be done, right?
He would have moved on to some other, even if he was still into the power domination stuff, it would have been two new people he could break. It doesn't even make sense from that narratively for how someone like this would work. These two are going to wind up in a hole somewhere unless they kill him, unless they rise up.
And that doesn't work for me right now. It wouldn't work for a really long time because Whitfield has to be the villain for the Duttons. So there's no place for the prostitutes to come in and save the day because we have to have this Jacob Spencer, you know, whole showdown with Whitfield. So that's what makes it extra painful is like, you know, these prostitutes can't win, you know? Painful.
Telephones.
Very painful.
Telephones have come to Montana. This is where I was going with the wholesome moment. Kara, not to hint, hint, wink, wink to Jacob, tells him as he's leaving that the Parkers, Mary and Albert of Livingston, have a phone in their house now. And so when he gets to Bozeman, he can call Mary, Albert can, and tell him tell her that he is okay, and that allows her to worry about other things of her own choosing, which is where Kara was getting with that line. And I thought it was sweet because then late in the episode, we walk by a phone booth that has appeared on the street of Bozeman, and it reminded me in season 1 where on a trip to Bozeman, where they would normally tie up their horses outside of the courthouse, had been replaced by a parking space. And now, overnight, a phone booth has appeared on the street, and Jack asks his uncle if he knows how to use it, and he says, I got no idea. This idea that technology is creeping into this area, and that, like the conversation in season 1 about washing machines and refrigerators, making life easier so that we can enjoy other pursuits. Well, for the people who do those pursuits and do the dishwashing and do the clothes washing and want to know if their spouse is okay, these are welcome conveniences, but they are threatening to those like Jacob and even Jack, who's raised no other way. You know, it's threatening to them as a threat to their way of life that they know, which we would see. I think if you had asked Kevin Costner, John Dutton in Yellowstone, if they could go back to gas lamps and, you know, no telephones in the house and no cell phones. I mean, how many times do we see him throw his cell phone or like move the camp so that he couldn't be in cell phone range? I like the continuing theme that progress is marching forward, like paving the road out from the park out to the house. This is marching forward whether you like it or not. So it's just a question of how far do you struggle or how long do you struggle against technology? It's coming. Do you want to get in front of it and make your wife happy? Or do you want to continue to resist, but you're going to lose that fight anyway? You can't really stop progress, which is a theme in Yellowstone and all of the Yellowstone shows of wanting to stop progress. What do you think? Do they get a phone? Do we see that before the end of the season? Does Kara win her way here?
Oh, Lord. Maybe at the very end of this season, that would be a nice celebratory moment, as if they got a phone and a washing machine, maybe a fridge.
Our bar is very low right now,
That would be pretty
Caroline.
amazing.
Our
I
bar
know.
is very low.
I know, but it will only be a celebratory thing. There's no way anyone's just doing this for fun. They don't have the money. They don't have anything for this right now.
Before we get to Spencer and Alex, let's finish off with Jack and Elizabeth, because as I mentioned, there's no conversation between them. The only other time we see Elizabeth, she seems fine. When I originally watched it, I was like, oh, does she seem woozy or tired? But no, when I rewatched it again, no, she seems fine. So I think she's completely healed from the miscarriage. She comes down the stairs. She sees the sun is outside shining. She's like, thank God, finally the sun. So she goes to, understandably, to go, get some vitamin D on the porch, and the mountain lion is there. And thank God, Kara making all of the eggs, which I found very funny, because I definitely will bake things when I'm stressed and can't do other things. I'll definitely go make brownies or something that I can't otherwise eat or don't want to eat. But the feeling of doing something. And she just shoots that damn mountain lion dead through the window, which now they're going to have to replace.
That's what I thought too. I was instantly like, oh man, they're going to have to replace that glass. It's like so funny. We go to like such a very pragmatic, like that. I'm really glad she killed him, but also, damn.
Well, in the winter, where are they going to go? Right.
And how long will it possibly take? They don't have any extra money. They're going to have to just board it all up. But it's just like, oh God, just one more thing. And this mountain lion thing, it is so much just like this looming threat, that just feels like it's representative of so many threats that are going on around. But when you see that mountain lion, it's like, oh yeah, there are threats everywhere, even on your own front porch. You just step outside and you're instantly in danger.
Do we need to talk about how it was a little hard to see Michelle Randolph back in this wholesome role of Elizabeth Stratford Dutton after her turn in over the summer and late fall of Landman?
I am fine with talking about that for just a moment, but I for all of you guys who may or may not be watching Landman, we will just hit this for just a second. So Michelle Randolph is playing Billy Bob Thornton's daughter on that series, and she is an entirely different character. It is kind of whiplashy to see her, because I think that this Elizabeth role is so much more complex, and she's got so much going on in terms of trying to figure out how to survive and how to live in this world. And then you have her other character in Landman, who like really doesn't have a care in the world and is really just kind of fooling around, and she's kind of on perpetual spring break, if you will. And the way she talks and the conversations she has with, like, I'll say parental figures, because Kara and Jacob are not her parents, but still she has very nice, loving conversations with them, difficult ones. And then to see, Michelle have these conversations with Billy Bob Thornton that are like so raunchy and so completely different. And yeah, it was kind of a big whiplash for me to see them. But I'm really happy to see Michelle in this role with Elizabeth again, because to be honest with you, the other role that she's playing in Landman is so much more just at a shallow level. We really don't know very much about her. Yeah, that I'm glad to see her as an actress get a chance to show so much more to the Yellowstone audience in this Elizabeth role. So for me, I'm glad she has that side of it.
There was a time when everything was crafted from the earth. And everyone knew how to do it.
Why don't we know it anymore? What happened?
White man happened. The white man, he comes and he trades with us for our skins, our horses, our beads. He gives us sugar, knives, iron. And the people don't want to craft things from the land. They want to trade for the things that make life easy. And then when we run out of things to trade, the government just gives us the things until we forget how to make the things ourselves. Now they have our land. We're beggars at their fort. That's what governments want. They want beggars.
Why would they want that?
Because beggars, they cannot question. A beggar who questions goes hungry. A beggar who questions gets sent off to schools and taught not to question.
Better we don't beg at all. Better to just do things. for yourself.
Until the government finds out you're doing it.
But what does the government care?
Because if we're doing things for ourselves, then we don't need a government.
This is a Taylor Sheridan thesis. This is a thesis, I think, or one of his thesis statements across all of his shows. This idea that government, more often than not, is bad. Government, more often than not, takes away your freedoms and the ability to do for yourself. And even if it's wrapped in, we're making your life easier, which is interesting when you go back to the telephone and washing machine and dishwasher conversation. Even when government is making your life easier, they're actually being insidious in stripping away your ability to take care of yourself, because they want, as Runs His Horse says, beggars at the fort. Because if they can do for themselves, there's no need for government.
I think that you could also apply in a generalized way this concept back over to our prostitution Whitfield story of, like, if we put people in a position of having to beg, literally, and not being able to do for themselves, but like create this situation. I know it's like very like, you know, you got like microcosm of the two prostitutes stuck in a house with this like insane situation, but you also have the Native Americans who are stuck in their own crazy situation where it's like they're trying to live their life and trying to do their thing, but you have this like clamp down constantly that's like creating all of this extra insanity for them all of the time, no matter how much they're trying to just do their own thing. It seems like there's always this heavy-handed someone's after you at all times.
Someone's after you, and someone wants to possess you in some way or control you in some way. It's never benign.
Control.
It's
all control, right?
Control. It's all just different. Yeah. It's control in different skins and different shapes and costumes, but it's all control.
So then how did you feel about this episode and the focus on Tiona and this sort of like moving forward in this sort of relationship going on with Pete and everything? Did you feel like it rang true to you that given we have this entire first season of the fugitive run, the panic, the freaking out and everything, were we earned a moment here of them actually being able to be calm for a second? Or do you feel like this was too much too fast? Like there's no way that the adrenaline could have really been worn off here from the actual reality of them trying to be safe and be on the run right now.
I think they've had a couple of months now where they've been free from harassment. Yes, they're looking over their shoulder. And I think a good example that's going actually right to what you're talking about is when she goes and she takes off her clothes and Pete joins her kind of in the bush and they're about to, begin their, lovemaking, and she spies way up on the ridge a white man cowboy and she freezes immediately. So I don't think they're free. I don't think she feels like they're free. I don't think they're under any illusions that they're free. I think they're very much still looking over their shoulders, but it's been a couple of months. And even before season 1 ended, they had gotten kind of away. They had gotten to the Wyoming border. They were leaving Montana, the symbolic leaving Montana. Now, we saw this last season too. A lot of things happen off screen that maybe are important and that maybe you would want to see on screen. And I think this falls kind of in that category. This idea of the three of them are spending all of their time together. It's funny when Runs His Horse says, you guys haven't ... And she's like, why? When would we do that? You watch us like a hawk. I think they're always together.
Yeah, and it was really funny about the whole like waiting for the ceremony, but nobody actually waits stuff. And
then she literally runs off.
I know. And I guess what we can say about this scene, it does show us that impetuous, impulsive nature of teenagers, whether it's 1923 or 2025, it's no different. Like, they still have the same things on their brain. They still, no matter how much this is about desperation and survival and all this stuff, they still want to go and have sex before the ceremony and all this stuff. So I guess in that regard, I'll give them a moment of like normalcy, if you will, where like they're trying to show like, look, they're still humans. They're still human teenagers who are just as sort of silly and impulsive and, you know, wanting to move forward and be more grown than they really are and all that. I just didn't know if as the show itself, and you're right, we do need to focus on the months that have passed. Did the show give her enough of a sense of security and safety right now that this made sense, that she would feel comfortable getting half naked? You know what I'm saying? Like would a person feel that way at this point? And so I think I agree with you that the months, you have to focus on that.
I think you do have to focus on that. And again, like she doesn't get lost in the situation. She's still, she's about to have her first sexual experience and she's still keeping an eye out on people way far away on a ridge, you know, and pausing. Sure. So I think we earned it. And I was thinking back when I was preparing for this, about Pete and Tiona and have they moved them too quickly. One of the issues we had with the finale, if you go back to our 3-hour episode, was the pacing of the finale. And that it was a little bit all over the place. And one of the things was there was a whole conversation there where Runs His Horse, you know, says to the two of them as they're hunkering down for the night around a fire, you know, stop with the goo goo eyes. Or he makes a reference to goo goo eyes with them. So now 2 months later, and Pete is clearly doing the work. He's clearly putting the good foot forward with the possible dad-in-law that he's trying to woo here. I think this version of Pete was portrayed much more mature and much more older and much more responsible than the Pete we saw at the end of season 1, who was young and brash and goofy and tried to take on the 3 priests. And, you know, when they were looking for Tiona and he himself was out and about, sitting on a rock, he was more reckless and youthful. This Pete seemed older and wiser and more mature. And like I said, doing the work of, I know her dad is very into bow making and the right woods for bow making. So I'm going to sit here and have a very detailed conversation about what do you think, sir, elder sir, is the best wood for bow making, long bows versus short bows. Yeah, it was all very much like, you know, I want dad to like me. I want her dad to like me. And so we're going to have this conversation and then I'm going to go hunt for us. I felt it all worked for me. I thought it was very sweet in an episode that was hitting us over the head with things that were difficult. I thought it was actually a very nice, sweet respite moment. And on the whole, I think when you take into account the months that have gone by, I think felt earned or was earned enough for me to allow myself to enjoy the moment from everything else.
I think that's fair. And again, we do need some moments that are not everybody's getting killed and everyone's running and everyone's screaming, you know. We do need some quiet moments.
And also in the scene, we come across with who is credited as the lone cowboy. This is a rare interaction between a white man and a Native American in a Taylor Sheridan show that is just pleasant. Is just pleasant and nice and doesn't come with threats and violence, and they just speak to each other and you're okay here and you are safe here. For whatever reason, the cowboy is picking up that this, he presumes him to be Comanche, is a little scared about where he is, finding out that he has missed his target of Oklahoma by 100 miles too far west. But it's pleasant and it's fine. And I didn't get any other kind of, they're going to be attacked or something. It just seemed like a very nice moment. And we have so few of those.
That's true.
What did you think of the lone cowboy?
Well, I know you did a little deep dive on old Cody lore. I mean, immediately, I know that Taylor enjoys using local people when he can and actual cowboys when he can. And so as soon as this gentleman started talking, I was like, oh, you are a local. You are not an actor by trade that I see. I think that you are coming to drop some information on us. And that's completely what he did.
So let's talk about Cody lore first, because he is a real cowboy. He works at the Lazy Double D Ranch in Blaberville, Texas, west of Houston. I don't know if you're familiar with old Blaberville.
I'm familiar with the Lazy Double D.
You are?
Sure.
Oh, well, there you go. So they have actually kind of a fun website. And on their website, they actually have a section about Cody the cowboy lore. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it out because I thought he's clearly not an actor. He's doing the best he can. When Pete comes out of the bush and he goes, "You nearly scared the pants off of me," or whatever he said. It was just very word by word, and I found it very sweet and very.
It is very sweet. And here's the thing: if you're an audience member of any of Taylor's shows, you know very well that he does like to pull these people in who are not super seasoned actors. We always have lots of love for these people because they're authentic. They're real people. So sometimes that their delivery of lines might be a little bit clunkier than we're used to, but that's like the big, that's like when the big light bulb comes on. That's like, this is a real person who's really telling you some authentic information now. So you should pay attention if you care about the historical stuff. Don't get bothered.
Here's a little bit about Cody that I thought was just a nice little thing about him. Cody volunteers for a program called County Cowboys. When livestock is in trouble, he is the guy to call. During Hurricane Harvey, he spent 6 days pulling drowning cattle at neighboring ranches out of shoulder-deep water. His perspective is that's what good neighbors do. Some of the horses he used for the mission had never worked cattle before, and none of the horses had been exposed to water like that. Yet Cody was calm and got the job done. He is cool under pressure and has an air about him that everything is going to be all right.
Oh, well, then that's a really nice thing to inject into Tiona's storyline.
Yeah, he has a great quote here. "Horses help relieve stress, and the peace of mind you get when you're with them is invaluable." Old Cody Lore, the lone cowboy, seems like a good guy. Seems like a cowboy you'd want to know and have on your side. So the information he drops is, like we said, they were trying to get to the Washita River on the Texas-Oklahoma border, which is kind of just north of Dallas if you're looking at a map from what I was able to see. They did not make it. They wound up in the Texas Panhandle, at the bottom of what is the J.A. Ranch, which was the ranch started by Charles Goodnight, the father of the Texas Panhandle, and John Adair, a English aristocrat. Followers of our podcast, or listeners of our podcast and followers of Taylor Sheridan's shows, will recall that we actually met Charles Goodnight back in 1883. He was in 2 episodes 107, 108 of 1883, playing Charles Goodnight, Charles Goodnight being played by Taylor Sheridan, show creator and writer. And he had a memorable line. I'm going to play it because, again, we're talking about Taylor Sheridan thesis, and this is a Taylor Sheridan show, and all of this kind of runs through his mind and his thought process. Here's the quote that has stuck with me. As soon as I heard Charles Goodnight, this is the quote that came to mind. So clearly it was 3 years ago, and it has stuck with me. So I want to play it now real quick.
Come across any barbed wire yet? Never heard of it. It's twisted steel wire with little barbs woven into it, sharp as a knife's tip. It is the one fence cattle will not push through. They're going to carve this country into little rectangles and fence them off. And just like that, 2 of our great pleasures are gone.
Again, the gobbling up of the West of nature, and then the partitioning it off into fences and barbed wire and land. And, it seems it's such a thing with him about that nature that we lost, where we could just roam it. And the idea of it being sectioned off by barbed wire is, I don't know, it's sad. It makes me sad when I think about it like that. There's a romantic aspect to what Charles Goodnight is talking about in that clip that has definitely been lost, certainly by 2025. I know these places exist, and you can still find places in this country where you can walk for miles and miles in any direction and not see another human, not see a fence, not see a road. But I'm just outside New York City. I don't have those areas around me. So it feels very kind of foreign, and I'm very kind of nostalgic and romantic for that kind of time period. I know you get to see a little bit more of God's country and nature where you are, though, you're near Houston. So even, I don't know, what's your experience? Does the barbed wire quote resonate with you?
So for our listeners who don't know, I live in Texas and have lived in Texas the majority of my life, and I am outside of Houston. And I would say that I do have a much different point of view than you do. Definitely, you being outside of New York City, we still have plenty of open land down here, and lots and lots of ranches and lots going on that really feel not too different from way back when. So I think that for me, all of this is very familiar. And things like what you're saying about breaking up the land with barbed wire and stuff, it is sad to see that those things happen. But I mean, it is the progress that we all so badly want sometimes. And then with progress comes so many other things that were the unintentional consequences that come along with. And I think that Taylor does a good job of shining some light on some of those unintentional moments that are like, oh yeah, in order to get this progress, we had to do this. And that really, ruined this. And so I think he does a great job with the audience of pointing those things out and helping us understand that everything is like a yin and a yang, nobody gets all the good things without having to take a bunch of bad too, which goes back to that there's no winners kind of feel of like, just how many times do you feel like, okay, we got to a conclusion, but nobody really feels good about what happened, That's kind of a lot of what goes on in Taylor Sheridan's entire series everywhere, no one feels happy.
Well, that's the quote about compromise, right? Like when two sides, the sign of compromise and the sign of a good deal is when both sides walk away unhappy with how it, the outcome.
Which is so too bad, but I think it's just truthful, especially when you are making big steps towards progress. There are just those moments when you kind of look and you're like, everything is terrible right now. And hopefully we picked the right little, jag in the road and we went the right direction here. But is it going to take some time for all of us to accept whatever this new normal is? And so many of these people, I mean, gosh, when we're talking about the Native Americans and we're talking about, women and we're talking about different races like Alice, and you're looking at just how much struggle and utter pain that all these people went through. I never for a moment, and I know you've heard this from me in a lot of other shows that we've covered, I have extreme gratitude for all of the people who came before us who are willing to sacrifice and do all these things, because I think it would be really difficult to find people these days with this type of fortitude who are willing to sacrifice at the level that these people are willing to. It's kind of amazing, when you really look at it. I know you and I look at that
and sacrifice for themselves clearly and to put themselves forward. But I think even they realized they were doing it for a larger goal and purpose too.
Do you think people have that these days? Do you think that they can see the bigger picture the way that
No.
I feel like ancestrally our families made really big sacrifices? Both of us are relatively new to America, both of our families, only by a couple generations. We're definitely not back in the 1600s or something, like we've only been here for a very short period of time. And when I think about what our families sacrificed in order to be here, it's like, I just don't know. When you look around sometimes now, people of today are like, they're put out if their phone isn't charged, or they don't have internet or the best Wi-Fi or whatever's going on, that you're like, you don't even know what people put up with.
I work very hard. I like to think I have a very strong work ethic. I work long hours, basically 7 days a week, doing this or that thing. And I don't think I probably come remotely close to what even the most average basic person 100 years ago probably had to do in their daily life to survive, let alone thrive.
Right. Just the most basic. Just don't get sick today.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. I think the success is built on those people's backs and those ancestors' backs. It's a little bit what Runs the Source is talking about. We have gotten, I think, a bit complacent and fat in the metaphorical sense on the back of those achievements and those gains made by those who came before us. I think this world is in an interesting place right now at the start of 2025. And in some ways, it feels like we're back 100 years in progress. But we may be there conditions-wise, but I don't know if we're there fortitude-wise, like you said. I
don't see it. I don't see people having the same get up and go, or the same willingness to fight, or the same, the same real understanding of what it takes to get to where you want to be. That alone, like really understanding how much work it takes to get from point A to point B, it feels like people have lost that a lot. And there's that sort of like, well, why haven't I been successful yet? Sort of the YouTuber kind of, mentality of like, how many of us know a 12-year-old who wants to be an influencer, and you're like, buddy, Like it takes a lot of work. People even kind of joke with us about podcasting that it's like, oh, that's so fun. And it's like, if only people really understood the amount of effort and work and energy that goes into even things that look like fun, that it's like when we're talking about like much bigger, much more important things, I don't really think people understand the work that it takes.
Here's a great example. I'm going to give you a little bit of history about Charles Goodnight and the GA Ranch, just because I covered this. If you want to go back to the 1883 episodes, again, 7 and 8 of this one season of 1883, this will be duplicative. But so the GA Ranch, founded in 1877 between Charles Goodnight and the English aristocrat John Adair. Prior to that, Charles Goodnight was a rancher his whole life. He ran cattle. He did cattle drives. There was a very famous cattle trail called the Goodnight Loving Trail because of him and the routes he carved out through the Texas Panhandle and moving cattle into New Mexico and Arizona and through Oklahoma and obviously through Texas. So in 1877, he forms his own ranch located in the Texas Panhandle. It's in the Palo Duro Canyon, which is southeast of what today is Amarillo. He entered into a partnership with Quanah Parker, who was the last chief of the Quijada Comanche, which the lone cowboy mentions him being a friend to Quanah Parker. It wasn't so much about being a friend. It was a partnership so that the Comanche did not raid the very large ranch land that he had accumulated. And in exchange for leaving the ranch alone, Goodnight gave a lot of meat and cattle and other goods and supplies to the Comanche. So they had kind of a good relationship insofar as they exchanged and kind of watched out for each other. But it was more based out of protecting what was his, but still, in the view of history, in the review of history, we could say he had a good relationship with the Comanche. By 1885, the ranch had grown to 1,325,000 acres. I can't even begin to imagine what 1.3 million acres worth of land looks like. But talk about fortitude and waking up every morning and busting your butt until sundown and thereafter every single day. And honestly, in 1885, that's when John Adair ends. So had he not died, who knows if they would have continued to, maybe they would have taken over the entirety of the Texas Panhandle. I don't know. By 1887, Goodnight had lost interest in the ranch and the business, and he sold his interest in the JA Ranch. He moved a little north to a new plot, began the Goodnight Fair Cattle Company in 1887 on 2,400 acres. Him and his wife, Mary, would build a house there, which you could still visit. It's just actually outside of what now is called Goodnight, Texas. And the JA Ranch is also like a national landmark. I don't think it's a park, but you can still go visit the area, the remnants of what was the JA Ranch, even still today. Just fascinating. And so you think about what this guy woke up and decided to build. Most people aren't doing that today, is the point that we're saying. So
no, and there's so many things that like even how we were talking about the modern conveniences, the phone, the refrigerator, the washing machine, all those things, even that, I mean, I feel like you and I have had the conversation offline of being like, man, when is the last like great invention that like, recently. And I don't even want to talk about phones. Like that's like, okay, fine. Like, let's just forget about having a phone in your hand. Okay. Other than that, like what is so different in your house than the things we were just talking about? A washing machine, a dishwasher, a telephone. Like these are all the same things. Like we haven't moved that far, from those inventions that I'm like, what is going to be the next really great sort of like push forward where we have all these inventions and cures and changes that we really feel like we are taking a step forward progress wise. I'm very much looking forward to that as a human in the world today. I would like next steps.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we still haven't even figured out what's at the bottom of our oceans yet. I mean,
we haven't at all.
So I don't know.
I know. It's crazy.
Anyway, all right. So let's move on. Let's finish off our villains. We talked about Whitfield. I don't want to give him any more time or that plot line any more time, but we got to talk about Banner because we see Banner in Livingston with his wife, which we really didn't see very much after maybe the first time we really saw Banner, when he came home a little battered and bruised after being almost hanged to death. We see his son Henry, who has grown up a lot in the 2 years. I didn't check to see if it was the same actor playing him, but we see his wife and his son. He's getting ready to leave to go to town. The son wants to go. He says, "You can't go." The wife says, "I still haven't met Whitfield." Banner says, "You don't want to meet him," and which I took to mean Banner recognizes Whitfield is a bad man, but a bad man that has gotten them money and soon land, he says. And he says that he's willing to lay with the devil if it's to provide a future for his son. So my question for you, Caroline, is this sincere? Is this sincere, Banner? Or is this because he's going to go hook up with some prostitutes in Bozeman and doesn't want to see them? And if it is sincere, are we setting up some kind of Banner redemption arc in season 2 where even he can't turn a blind eye to how bad a guy Whitfield is in pursuit of their goals?
I do think that he is starting to get more frightened of Whitfield. I would love to think that we could have something as gold and shiny as a redemption arc, but I think that might be too good for Banner. It might be something a little bit more subdued than that, but I do think he's going to have a realization of like, I am over my head. Like, this is too much. And I do think the way that he's kind of keeping his distance and keeping his family hidden, and not really like right up in Whitfield's face and stuff. I think that's the vibes that I'm getting, is like, he is starting to understand. Maybe there was like a real appeal and an excitement about Whitfield to start with because he's so powerful and he's so got all these ideas, and that's really wow for someone like Banner. And to be recognized by Whitfield and say, "Hey, you're somebody that I could use." I mean, that's all very flattering to him.
Who doesn't want to be told they're somebody?
Who doesn't want to be told that? But at the same time, I do think that Banner is keeping a little nugget of like, I think I need to keep this guy at arm's length because he really is someone he's over my head, for what he can do. And like Banner won't even be able to think of the things that Whitfield could possibly do.
I know. I mean, his wife's name is Ellie, and knowing what Whitfield is willing to do. I mean, Banner, when it comes to the sex workers in season 1, just wanted to pour champagne on them and have a good time. He wasn't into, I didn't get the impression he was into in any way, shape, or form the things that Whitfield was into. So I think he very much wants to keep his wife away from that. And his son, too. And listen, I also someone who very easily could be heard saying I would gladly and willingly lay down with the devil in order to protect the future for my son or provide a future for my son without hesitation. So there's a part of me that wants to let's get a Banner redemption arc going here. But if we're going to say
is
Jacob
it realistic?
Right. And if we're saying Jacob and Kara and Spencer and Jack and the Duttons are our heroes, like you said, Whitfield has to be the antagonist. Banner's not strong enough to be an ongoing antagonist to the Duttons. He is a B staying in the Whitfield lexicon. So we're not getting rid of Whitfield. I think you're right. But also, I don't think we can. Banner is the arm, right? He is the guy who's going out in the doing and the violence, whereas Whitfield is the brains behind the operation. So I can't see that we get good, wholesome Banner in our scenario, but maybe at least we could see he is more reluctant to do what he is doing.
Yeah, that's how stuff works, right? You get in a little bit and it doesn't seem that bad. And then you get, you take a few steps forward and you're like, well, this is a little more than I meant to do. And then suddenly you kind of look behind you and you're like, oh my God, I have taken so many steps into this Whitfield mess. I do think he will have some moment of that. I don't know how quickly it will come, where he looks back and realizes like, I got in over my head and I'm starting to get kind of freaked out, because I don't think he has any shot at controlling anything that Whitfield could do to him or his family or to anyone. So once he realizes that like, oh no, I think he's going to get legitimately frightened.
To quote Joey Tribbiani, the great Joey Tribbiani from Friends, "You're so far over the line, you can't even see the line. The line is a dot to you."
It will definitely become a dot. I definitely feel for Banner.
Crow! Indian girl, 16 years old. Have you seen her?
There are no Crow here. There are no Crow.
Master! As a man of God, I demand you release this child.
You demand it, huh?
I do. It's in your graveyard, Father. That same man of God staring at me now. That's the one who filled it. God's will filled it. Now we're getting somewhere. That's what I am. The will of God.
Now we're getting somewhere. That's what I am. I'm the will of God. There's something snaps in Marshall Kent in this scene from the moment that they pulled up. And if you saw right before they opened fire, the two marshals and Father Renaud opened fire on the Comanche on the horseback, he kind of smiles because he says, put the gun down or I'll shoot you. And the Comanche says one more time, why are you here? And he kind of smiles to himself like, good, I'm glad you said that so I can do what I'm going to do now. Right.
Yeah, I agree. This was a twist on Marshall Kent to me that was much more unhinged and wild-faced. Like, I didn't see that coming so quickly for him. I know that he has been, I mean, we saw him, obviously. We saw him kill Tiona's grandmother. Like, we know that Marshall Kent is not a good man. We know this, but there was something about the viciousness of his interaction with these people so quickly, you know, like he let it escalate so fast.
He escalated it.
You know, he did. And not only that, but we end up with 3 killed men, and we can only assume a killed child in like a 2-second period of time, which felt, again, as an audience member, after prostitution storyline, after, you know, we're frightened with Tiona, we're frightened, you know, in all these different scenarios that are happening so quickly. And then now we have 3 deaths for sure, plus a child getting run over. It was like, my God, Taylor, like this was so much.
He grabs the first girl who I would put as like a teenager and
Maybe
doesn't get
older.
Get the answer he wants. So he pushes her away and then goes and grabs the child. He's upgrading his hostage level.
Yes. He was looking for someone to be even more sympathetic because no one was crying if he was going to kill the older woman, but suddenly there was a child and everybody was freaking out. But I was really surprised by how quickly he snapped. And, you know, I guess we have to go back to the whole thing. He's been on this hunt, too, for a couple months. All our time we were giving Tiona to kind of like get more comfortable in her situation with Pete. Well, guess what? The rest of them, the priest and Kent and everybody, they're all only getting more and more angry, you know, as they're moving forward. So I guess we should have expected him to be this much more ready to snap, but dang, it was quick. And I was quite surprised.
And in that clip, he calls Father Renaud on his bullshit about, I've seen your cemetery. But then at the same time,
twice he brings up the cemetery.
But at the same time, then goes and runs down the child as to make the message clear of spread the word. I'm looking for this crow girl and I won't stop until I get her, meaning I won't stop killing you. I won't stop harassing you. He's the devil being lied down with. We were just talking about Banner laying down with the devil in order to protect the future. Father Renaud, because of his pursuit and not being willing to let Tiona go and let one out of his grasp, is now laying down with the devil that is Marshall Kent. And I think even he is starting to be like, this is more than I bargained for.
I think so. And I think we have to remember how much time has passed, how long they've been also on this hunt for Tiona, and how much that, you know, they're just going to be losing their patience more and more and more. And we should expect, I think, to see more vicious behavior out of them.
I read online a couple of people asking the question of, is it realistic that Father Renaud and these 2 marshals, the 3 of them together, would be traveling all the way into very southern Oklahoma? They are not anywhere near Montana at this point, on the hunt for this one escaped girl. Is it realistic? Is it realistic that the marshals would be doing it? Is it realistic that the father, who has abandoned his school apparently in Montana to go on this pursuit for the last several months, who's running, especially with the 2 main nuns having been killed by Tiona? What's happening? Is it realistic? I'm curious if you had a thought on that. I have my own thoughts, but I was curious if you had a thought about, is this a realistic storyline to be drawing out?
I do think that the conversation we just had about Banner, about taking a couple steps in and then getting further than you realized really quickly, I kind of think that there's not a good point yet for this group to call it quits. Even though I agree with you, my goodness, we just watched 1883 and it took forever to make this trek from Texas to Montana. So when we're looking at it in reverse and they're coming back down in this storyline, it feels like, wow, they got there really quick and without a lot of scuffle and without a lot of interacting with 10,000 different fatal potential moments, you know?
The marshal did say, because I think Father Renaud brings that up, and he says that we're going to take the train south and then get back on horseback and ride into Comanche country. So, which I guess explains it a little bit, but still,
they have to explain that, because otherwise this is like, you know, if you've been following since 1883, then for most of us, we're like, how in the world are they making this trip so easily? So I'm glad they stopped to do that. But what I'm saying is, I think by doing stuff like that, it's again, like you took 3 more steps instead of 1 more step. And then you look back and you're like, oh God, we've gotten really far away from home and we've gotten really far into this hunt, and probably further than we kind of actually initially committed to. But now what do we do? I mean, I think they're at a point now where they almost can't stop, because it would be like giving up at a point where they have come so far, you know? I want them to give up and get out of here and leave her alone. And I'm kind of wondering, if she's married, does that mean she's like no longer a child that could be drugged back? Obviously, the murderer portion,
well, I think that's
why
the marshals are still there, right? The marshals are committed because of the murders.
100%. But I think a lot of people, you know, our listeners, you might think like, why are they hunting the student? Like that, you know, like we have to remember, like there's a much bigger picture here. And even though she's like getting older and in theory could be married by the time that they would find her, we still obviously have this crimes committed that are not just finding a runaway child.
Degrees of evil, right? Banner and Father Renaud. Evil men, well, Father Renaud, certainly evil men.
I think Father Renaud's way worse than Banner.
Yes, and I actually feel bad even putting Banner in the same boat as that. But okay, but Banner attacks the Duttons, takes their land, puts the sheep on their land, right? Because he feels he's owed a thing, doesn't feel like the Duttons should own as much land as they do and have it fenced off.
Or go a little further and say, and is desperate because his flock is dying, right? And is trying. So this isn't just on principle. It's not just like, I want a little more.
I mean, like literally ambushes them with guns and violence and kills Duttons. And
insanity.
So like, degree of evil, but then gets in bed with Whitfield so much further along the line of evil. Father Renaud, psychopath, right? Running the school of abuse, employing these nuns. He's like
institutional abuse.
Right. But now even he is staring down a barrel that it's making his stomach turn. I think he was sincerely, I want to know if disgusted is too much, but he was disturbed by, I think, what Marshal Kent did. And you could almost see on his face, this is not what I thought what I was getting.
Definitely the child, running the child over with the horse. That moment felt so unnecessarily cruel. Sure. Like there was nothing else to do at that point. He did not.
Yeah, he fired his gun. He killed the men on horseback without hesitation. But then even he had a line. But you know what? You've now laid down with the devil, and it's too late to say this is too far. You can't say this is too far. You are here. You are in it. Blood is on your hands. That child's blood is on your hands, Father, as much as it is on Marshal Kent, and Marshal Thomas, I believe, is the other one who didn't speak at all. I don't know. But I mean, the fact that Tiona and runs his horse and Pete aren't even in the Oklahoma territories, they're really nowhere near where these guys are. I don't know what happens with this storyline. Do they just keep killing Comanches in search of Tiona? Do Tiona and her dad and Pete, now realizing that they're in Texas, do they now go east to go to the Oklahoma country, or do they continue to stay in the kind of relative quiet that they have? I hope they stay. I don't want them to wander into Oklahoma now.
I don't want them to either. I hope they stay, and I hope that they... that's what I was trying to ask. Like, I wonder how, like, if she's married, if there's more protections coming for her, or if that's just like such a, oh, my heart is just always wanting to think of something hopeful and good. But like, I want to think that somehow she could get some more status to try to somehow have more power in this dynamic. But I mean, I know she can't, but I just want that for her so badly.
It's shaping up to be a very Jean Valjean and Javert kind of situation. You know, how long will she have to look over her shoulder? Well, maybe forever, or at least until these marshals are gone.
Well, and here's the thing, even if the marshals are gone, right?
Someone will take their place.
Well, and not only that, but like the school itself, when we're talking about the institutional abuse, there's no, I mean, unless you exploded the school and every single person who ever heard about that school, like how are you ever getting out of this murder charge? That's the part that it's like, you're not just trying to outrun these three men, you're outrunning the law forever.
And she is a rainwater. She is a rainwater, and we know it. So we know at some point she or her people return to Montana if she is in fact Thomas Rainwater's grandmother, as people suspect, which we don't know for sure, other than the Rainwater common surname or common family name. But let's go with that. She's going to return home at some point, presumably.
Well, and we know that her being in Texas, and we know that Spencer is coming through Galveston. Maybe these two somehow cross paths at some point. How that would work, I have no idea. I don't have the storyline plotted out for how this works, but you are starting to get two people in the same place. And that made me start wondering, like, how is that going to happen?
So one of the interesting things that I learned when I was reacquainting myself with Charles Goodnight was one of the things that led to his disillusionment with running the J Ranch in the 1880s was the growth of the trains running through the Panhandle, going, south and north. Remember, the Duttons, the original pioneer Duttons, went through the Texas Panhandle. That's how they ran into Charles Goodnight originally on their way to Montana. And if there are, in fact, now trains now running through that land or that part of the country, maybe it is realistic that Spencer runs into Tiona and runs his horse and Pete on his journey and somehow brings them north. Because remember Zane gave the sheep to Runce's horse, I believe, right? I think it was Runce's horse that he gives the sheep to when Jacob orders Banner's sheep to be taken to the res to feed them because he doesn't want them on the land anymore. And that's actually what Runce's horse is doing when Hank and Pete find him to tell him about Tiona. He's like off guarding the sheep in the middle of nowhere, or Hank rather is off guarding those same sheep, in the middle of nowhere. And that's when he runs into Tiona and she's asleep on top of like that rock formation to get away from the lion from the night before. So there is entanglement already between the Duttons and this specific part of the tribe that they don't even realize that they're entangled, but they are.
They are. And when you start geographically getting them to be in the same place, that you've got to think, how are they not going to cross paths? And kind of, like Chekhov's Galveston port or something. I don't know. There's got to be something here where these two end up together, I think, somehow, on some part of the journey.
Perfect segue to our last section. Let's talk about Spencer and Alex. Spencer, we find him on the Italian merchant ship bound for Galveston. We said he's looking jacked. He's working in the boiler room. He befriends Luca, who I presume is going to be a recurring character now, played by Andy Dispenza.
I liked him very much. My first vibe off of him. Yeah, he had a real Pixar sidekick vibe to me. Yeah. Like his features are a little bit cartoony and in the cutest of ways. His little hat, his little vest, he's a very cartoony character. And to me, I felt for him. Everything that happened with him, Mike, you know me very well. And the rest of these listeners, you guys will all get to know me. I hate when they use rape and things like that as a storyline. It makes me so crazy. So I am really glad that they made this matter. It just didn't just happen. It's like, no, it actually created an entire series of events. It was so important to me because it is everything the prostitution storyline is not, which is like, I don't feel like it's moving the plot forward. But this, if you're going to have an awful sexual assault scene, let it at least forward the plot. And it did. And I'm so glad that, and very proud of Spencer for standing up and ending that entire situation, because that was like, please don't let this be one of those like turn a blind eye or like.
Right. That whole room of men, they were all awake. He wasn't the only one who heard the whimpering and the grunting,
And you got the idea that this was not the first time.
No,
and
he said,
this is all. Yes,
Luca tells him
you knew
since
that
they left
as the
port.
audience. Yes, and so when you think about that, it's like everyone else ignored this, and it was like, I'm proud that we're getting some character development for Spencer. We're seeing even a little bit more about him. That yes, he is somebody who fights animals, right? But he's also willing to like fight for people and for good people. And that made you feel good about him.
And I like that there was no punishment beyond having to clean up the blood for carrying out the justice. That the captain confirmed his story and then shot the big man dead. The big man was how he was credited also, which is funny because that's how Luca describes him when he's reciting the letter. He says, "Thank you for killing the big man." I like that there was no punishment for that because I feel like this is the exact kind of setup where Spencer did a heroic thing, did a good thing, and then was going to pay some kind of weird, unfair penalty.
He's actively paying the unfair penalty right now for something that had just happened on the cruise ship. So, it's like, yeah, it would have been really reasonable for them to like throw him in the brig or throw him off the ship.
Throw him off board, right.
Yeah,
to put him in a
lots
dinghy
of things could have happened. Yeah, next. And so you're right. I'm so glad that it was just like, you're in the right, you fell on the right side of this story in this situation, and there's going to be no repercussions for you.
I think it was interesting in the funny fighting for money scene that he easily dispatches the big guy, but it's the man his size who believe is named Lorenzo, played by George Gallagher. I don't think we're going to see him again because Spencer bit off a chunk of his neck. But it was a guy his size who was wiry like him who presented the challenge in the fight for him. So it was kind of like a mirror who both had been in the war, both had killed Germans. This was an Italian version of Spencer in some ways, I found it. And it was the one that was actually kind of a challenge for him and the one that he viciously went at to put down. Right? He puts down the big guy and then just kind of is done with it. This guy he puts on the ground and then punches him 5 or 6 times severely, probably more than he needed to finish that fight.
Hey, I got to say, backing up to that big man moment just for a second, there has been in this one episode so many moments of a belt being used. There's something that's like clicking in my head. That's like, there's something foreshadowing about the belt. It's like Chekhov's belt for me because it was being used with the prostitutes. It was being used with Spencer. There was
good
a
and
bunch
for bad.
Of different.
The belt in 2 different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say it's all bad, but everything felt very foreshadowy. Like, how is this somehow going to come back around? Because it just seemed like so much, so heavy-handed all of a sudden.
Well, let's see, the metaphor of the belt, right? Belt holds things up, right? It holds up our pants, It braces us. But now we're seeing it be used for violence, either as a leash in the one sense or to whip the big man, into submission. If you come at me, I'm going to fucking kill you, he says. So the thing helping us and holding us up now being kind of turned into a weapon of violence. The land, is the land, the belt, the thing that binds us?
I don't know, but there's something there that I just want to put a little pin on it, put it up on our board as like I feel like there was a lot of belt action that we saw in a way that makes me wonder. I really like this Luca storyline in terms of how we can easily see how this can extrapolate out into a much longer friendship for them, a much longer partnership for them, and move Spencer into like another position that he needs to get into. Being able to make money in this fighting thing was really like a surprise. Like, oh, okay, this is like a wacky side hustle that
reminded me of Far and Away, the Tom Cruise Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise he fights for money. That's how he actually makes his money, so that he can provide a life, so that he and Nicole Kidman can be together.
Weird. Do you know how much I would never want to be like, you know what? I'm gonna go fist fight for some extra spending money today.
My ribs need a good beating. They need a good tenderizing. So many of these guys when they fight, even Spencer in his fight with Lorenzo, like he was just taking shots on his like ribs, the side of his ribs and his kidney, just to set the guy up. Oof, good Lord.
I'm loving this whole this bringing up this like real life gangster situation. I'm loving the whole mafia type of where we're heading here. I feel like this is like, we need some people who are connected, who are going to be able to move us forward, who are going to protect us in some way. I hope that's how this works out. I hope that Spencer doesn't mess this up. I hope that the relationship between him and Lucas stays strong and they can do this and somehow get some stepping stones here forward for Spencer, because we need this. He needs something to change to get out of this sitch.
Right. Let's play this clip and then we'll circle back to that.
Can you swim?
I can swim.
That's gonna be a problem.
Why is it a problem?
You may want to die, but your body don't. your body will fight. And then you'll tread water till you can't. Then you'll float. It's a pretty smooth day. Yesterday was the day to jump. So if you jump in, be ready for a long day.
I would just go under, open my mouth, and breathe in.
Yeah, but your body won't let you. You just sit here and float until a storm or a shark has its way with you. People aren't defined by what happens to them. They're defined by what they do. More often than not, they're defined by what they don't do, what they're too scared to do. Too lazy, selfish. Is your mother alive? Does she love you?
Of course.
You're just gonna throw that over the side.
When he gives that little squeaky, of course, I thought to myself, the first thing I thought to myself was Caroline just said, aw, somewhere.
I definitely did. And did you feel my Pixar character kind of feel?
For sure.
Like,
I mean, he could be the cousin, like the Italian cousin of the Ratatouille guy.
Yes, like he's so cute. And I love this whole door that he opens as, you know, this next potential step for Spencer. Like that's the biggest deal to me, is that we needed some sort of crack somewhere, something that was going to say, how do we move Spencer forward? I mean, we know Alex needs that same type of thing in order to move forward as well. I just didn't know where it was going to come from for Spencer. So I'm really glad that Luca came in on the scene. I'm really sad of what happened to him, but I'm very proud of Spencer for standing there by Luca and working through that entire jumping over the side scene. I think we don't really know as audience members who that speech is going to hit when they're watching this, that someone who might be having a really terrible time right now, who needs to hear what Spencer's saying about, like, you're leaving your family, you're doing all these things. Like, this could be a really important scene for somebody out there who's listening. And I hope that it does help. And I do think it's going to help our characters moving forward.
I think the message of it too, of we're often defined by the things that we do, and even more so the things we don't do, and the things we don't have the courage to do, or, you know, the strength to carry forward. I think it goes a little bit towards your original question from the top of this episode of what does Spencer bring? Well, Spencer brings this philosophy. Spencer brings acknowledging that what has to be done in order to protect what you want to protect, and not throw it over the side.
I did kind of question you at the top and say, like, does Spencer have like negotiating skills to be able to deal with Whitfield? And maybe this quote that you just played us kind of shed some light on that Spencer, yes, he is good with his physical body. He can punch people, he can kill people, he can do stuff. But we were wondering, does he have the emotional and mental fortitude to be able to talk his way through some of these situations? And this is one of the first times I feel like we really saw that. This was a life or death situation that he used his words, not something we've seen a lot with him.
For those wondering, $420, which is what Spencer earned from his one night of fighting, approximately in today money is about $7,600 to $7,700.
That's amazing to me. Again,
not a bad chunk of change for one night of fight. For a bunch of merchants, like merchant dock work, boat workers.
You should get some fight club going or something. Get some side hustle going. Apparently men do this.
Well, so it's interesting, though, because you already hinted to this, but part of Luca's goodbye is the letter that he wrote in Italian, because I don't know how to write into English, was telling
Only you
Spencer,
can do that because you're Italian.
Yes, that's why I can do it, and no
you
one
can
else
do that accent.
It's a me, a Luca. He tells Spencer when he gets to Galveston, to look up Luca's cousin, Salvatore and Rosario Macheo. These were real-life gangsters that really ran Galveston at this time. They were known as the Macheo Syndicate or Macheo Organization, and we're going to have more on them and more history about the open era of Galveston, which was occurring at this time, kind of the Roaring 20s Galveston style. We're going to talk more about that as a history lesson in the coming episodes, but I just want to put it out there that these were two real guys. It was Salvatore Sam, went by Sam Macheo, and Rosario Macheo. They were real life brothers. So I like this. This is something that Taylor does that I always like when Taylor does do it. He brings in this like history fiction, right? He brings in real historical things and interweaves it with our characters here. So Spencer standing up for Luca one night in the bunk room of an Italian merchant ship may change the course of Spencer's life for good or not. And all he had to guide him was his moral compass. And maybe that's going to be the thing that actually allows him to get home safely, and maybe also bring some money answers. Maybe
bring some muscle. Maybe bring something with him, right?
You know, this is the age of bootlegging. And you know what occurred to me? What if Spencer actually? What if the Yellowstone? I thought about this when I was writing up my notes. What if the Yellowstone becomes a hub of bootlegging as relating to the Macheos? Because we're going to find out the Macheo brothers actually had beef with New York. With the New York mafia, which is interesting because that's where Alex is going to be coming into, right? Her plan is that she's going to come into New York and then find out passage out to Montana. There was real life beef and struggles between the New York family and the Macheos in Galveston. And this is a couple of years before the real rise and then pinnacle of Al Capone. And Al Capone is already on the scene in Chicago, because that would certainly solve economic problems if the Yellowstone was able to get into bootlegging. Certainly there was money to be made at that time. And we know Jacob and the sheriff love a good speakeasy. We see that in this episode.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
I don't know. It's going to be a fun storyline to play forward. But again, I like using these real life characters and this real life setting to kind of set the scene, and the chance meeting of Spencer benefiting it from being a good person that Spencer is. He wasn't out of his comfort zone. He was just being himself, standing up for what he thought was right, because that's what he believes the right thing to do is. And that maybe having a life-changing good consequence is hopeful. Is hopeful in a show that was short on hope, I think, in a lot of ways.
Definitely. And I think is really important to show there's storytelling that can be done where you have an abusive, violent scene, but it leads to opening doors and moving the plot forward, versus the Whitfield situation, which we just haven't had any payoff on yet in an entire freaking season, where we just don't know where that could possibly lead to be something more. And so for me, I'm like, if you're an audience member, like on the fence, I want to say, look, this storyline with Luca is actually like a good little light, that came into the room. That's like, no, look, some of these storylines that are very difficult to stomach are opening the doors for our characters to go to another direction. So I'm kind of clinging to that for all of those people who are having a really hard time getting through this episode.
So this episode ends with Spencer seeing the lights of Galveston in the distance as the alarms start to ring on the boat, I guess alerting them that land is within sight. So it seems like Spencer's time on the boat is done.
Were you surprised, though, that he made it to Galveston so quick?
Well, again, 2 months have passed, though, right? So
no, I know, but in what we're seeing as the audience member, was it like a little bit of jarring, like, oh shit, we're already here in Galveston? It was a little for me. Like, I was like, oh, we're at Galveston? Okay.
Well, again, it's like the Tiona story, though, right? You have to remember probably about 2 months have gone by. So that is right. But because we didn't see any of that, it all happened off screen and it wasn't made clear to us, and we're just kind of having to clues to figure it out. It is a little bit jarring, but also if it bodes that Spencer,
we're moving forward.
If it bodes that Spencer gets back to Montana in like episode 4 instead of episode 8, then I'm in favor of it. Let's move the pacing along if it gets him home
I'm
faster.
Just going to tell you, this is the stuff, the scuttlebutt that I've been reading around is that he gets back in episode 6. That's just the gossip. I don't have any hard and fast, so don't be like quoting that. But what I'm saying is like, we know we're going to have to get through quite a bit with Spencer, I think, before we get there, which is really rough because if we're going to get to Galveston in episode 1, I want him to be in Montana in like episode 2, but we know that's not going to happen. So we're going to have some fortitude ourselves.
Half the season getting there, half the season being there. That was kind of in my head that I was hoping the breakdown would be. But
that would be nice.
I mean, if he doesn't get there to 6, but he's already in Galveston at the start of episode 2, that's right. Crazy pacing. What are we doing? Why?
It is.
We crossed him in one episode, and now we're going to spend then 5 more of him trying to. It's much further from Italy to Galveston than it is from Galveston to Montana.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I was like so surprised. But hey, like I said, I'm really happy to bring in Lucas Cousins. It's just a bright light for me of like, oh my God, here's a group of people who potentially already owes a favor to Spencer. And now he's got a little money in his pocket and some potential resources. Okay, I'm feeling a lot better of him. Alex, however, boy, do I have questions about the choices she's making.
Yeah, let's talk about Alex. Shut in a room in Sussex, England, in her family's home. One of the interesting things that comes up in her conversation with Jennifer is learning that, as she predicted would happen, her family has essentially been banned from being in London by Arthur's family, that they really have been blackballed for the fallout of the broken wedding and then the events on the RMS Majestic, which led to Arthur Jr.'s death over the side of the ship. Were you surprised that we even got a mention of that? These are people in the peerage, and that they have been banned from London seems drastic, that they have so little clout that would be the effect of it.
I was surprised that they had so little clout, but there was an awful lot of warning. If you think about it, in season 1, there was a lot of warning that, Alex, if you do this, there's going to be a bunch of fallout. It was only in individual little conversations with friends or just a one-liner here or there that you really had to remember in your head, like, there's going to be a lot more that happens once she gets back to her family. But her choices here, man, manipulating Jennifer into like some serious trouble.
I was curious what you thought about this.
I did not like it when she said that's what a best friend would do. That to me was a yicky line. That I'm not saying it was poorly written. I'm saying, oh, Alex, it's a really shitty thing to do.
Prove your friendship. I mean, she says several times, prove your friendship.
Jennifer was willing to help anyway. I mean, she showed up. She came. You didn't need to be like that to her, be cooler than that. But, Jennifer is being a good friend. She is trying to do everything that she can to help Alex. The pregnancy thing with Alex, I am very mixed bag on this because she physically didn't look anything like she could be pregnant. And she is so thin. But I mean, I know we had her on the boat with lots of motion sickness. I know we were like laying the groundwork that she was going to be pregnant. Again, all it made me think about was where women were during this time. Because it would be really, really easy for me right now to be very hard on that and say, my God, we're going to have another one be pregnant. We just had Elizabeth be pregnant. Now she's going to be pregnant. Like, God. But everybody's got to remember, lack of birth control, lack of anything. This is what women's lives were like. A series of like, oh shit, I'm pregnant again.
Well, she and Spencer basically did in their time together was ravage each other. On Zanzibar,
and obviously we know unprotected
in
everything.
The car after the lion attack and the elephant attack.
A million times, for sure. But it's important to remember where we were societally and that women were absolutely like handcuffed by this possibility of being pregnant all the time. Because it's kind of old as a storyline. It's like, oh, another woman's pregnant. But that is the reality of it.
All I could think of was if she is pregnant, which she thinks she is, though it occurred to me, she doesn't officially know that. She hasn't been to a doctor because she can't, because her family will flip out. Because she even says, what will happen when I start showing? Which my first thought was,
I kind of felt was just manipulative to Jennifer. I know. That's where I was like, kind of just like, it felt a little bit like she was using pregnancy as a way to force Jennifer's hand. Because she's like, oh my God, I could be showing at any second. When you're looking at her and she is just a stick.
My thought went more to the pregnancy can't be doing well if she's not showing at all and she's as thin and emaciated and she's not eating, like she's actively pouting in her room, not eating or closed herself off. If you have a child growing inside you, like you need to think about that, and not just lay in the bed all day. This whole scene was not a great look for her in the manipulation on all fronts of Jennifer, who was hesitant to come forward, but did in fact step up and did in fact, one, keep Spencer from being killed. It was because Jennifer corroborated their story that he was just put off the boat and nothing worse was happening to him. That was because of Jennifer coming forward, because they weren't taking Alex or Spencer's word for it. She's the one who helped Alex get almost off the boat and at least be able to see Spencer being put off the boat. Like, Jennifer has done a lot at great risk to herself. So I found the line of "that's what a best friend would do" exactly like you. I found it really a bad look, really manipulative, not great for Alex. And I like Alex. I actually like Alex a lot. I like her and I like Spencer. This was very icky. Did you think there was any significance of this bracelet that Jennifer gives her, which looks like kind of like silver and diamonds, maybe? The idea of, I expect you to send it back, but if you don't, I'll understand that you needed it. Are we going to see this bracelet again? Is this going to be, was this some heirloom that we missed in Yellowstone all these years?
Well, we'll definitely need to keep our eyes peeled for it. I would say let's pin it up for Jennifer's bracelet, and if we happen to see a bracelet randomly in future series, that would be pretty exciting, right? It'd be fun to see Beth wearing one or something.
We learn that Jennifer had earned just enough money to book a tourist class on an unnamed Cunard ship, and that's where we see them at the dock, and she's getting on the boat. What a little turkey when she turns around at the stop and she says, "I'm on to my next adventure." Girl, read the room. You're getting ready to go into steerage. Like, stop.
Yeah.
Just stop. Just go hide for a month.
Okay, the second that she was like, "Oh, I don't want to be in first class because I don't want to like see anybody," or blah, 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 I was thinking, oh, Alex, this is the Alex who decided to leap off of the overturned boat and try to get the life preserver, even after she was told not to get off that friggin' hull and just to sit there. This decision to like, I don't want to be fancy. Don't put me on a ship. That's nice. All this stuff. I'm thinking, this is going to blow back on you so hard, girl. Like, you don't know what traveling in the shitty conditions are really going to be like. And I think you are about to get really smacked down.
In a show that showed us sexual abuse and rape in two different forms in its first episode, I can only shudder to think what Taylor Sheridan is going to put Alex through on the boat in tourist class over the next...
I don't see how she is not going to be attacked by a man. Like, I don't see that. And how is she not even going to be potentially kidnapped or something? Like, I don't see this going well.
Right. Robbed at a minimum. It would be unrealistic for her to come through unscathed.
So minimal. And I know we've all seen like the longer trailer, and there's definitely a part where she's definitely grabbed up. So something is going to go on. But man, I was just feeling the naivete off of her with the "on to my adventure." It just made me feel like, girl, you have no idea. Like, we've all seen Titanic. We all know what the steerage class and what all these like different areas look like. You are going to be in trouble, girl. You are not going to be comfortable, and you are going to be very unhappy.
Here's a very polite description of tourist class from yesteryear. Tourist class generally was considered to sit between second and third class tickets. Often utilized retrofitted second class and third class areas of older, larger liners. I saw one area of the tourist class deck space, and it was the very like front of the boat, and it was just filled with crates and other crap. Like, it was no kind of deck space at all. It was for passengers traveling, quote, on a budget, often people who had made a new life in America or the descendants of them returning for visits to the old country. This is going to be a rough journey for her, to say nothing of, and I don't think she's thinking about this at all, when she gets off the boat in New York at Ellis Island, people who are on first class in those or cabin level tickets are going to be recognized as such when they come through Ellis Island and have an easier time of it getting through Ellis Island. Some single woman by herself coming through from the tourist class section of the ship going through Ellis Island, I don't think they're going to buy "I am the Duchess of Sussex" or you know, whatever. I don't think that's going to float water. I think they're going to look at her like a piece of meat. So in addition to the trials and tribulations she's going to have on the boat, just the experience at Ellis Island, someone is going to end up having to intercede on her behalf, or I don't see how she gets out of there. I just don't see it.
That's a good call. I am so scared for her for just the boat part that I hadn't even considered what it would be like the second she stepped off. I'm just thinking, how are you going to survive this trip? Like, I'm so worried
if she
her.
falls in with some baby mafia types, and then we actually have an interesting development between Spencer and the Galveston Macheos and Alex and the New York, crime families. I had to laugh out loud, and it was just another, oh girl, you don't know what you're getting into, when she says, "Can't be colder than this." There's like literally snow higher than your head, Alex, in Montana where you're going. Can't be colder
it's
than
gonna be. This is gonna be a rude awakening for her.
But in a perfect world, this is what Alex thinks her season 2 journey is. Let's take a listen to Alex writing her letter to Spencer.
Spencer,
my love, my life. I know not the path nor the manner with which I will find my way to you. But it is time the journey begin. I will enter the port in New York and then seek passage by train to Montana.
Thin on the plan. Thin on the plan. That's actually thinner than Kara's "we're going to hold our breath to spring and wait for Spencer to get home." There is no plan. You're just going to try and figure it out in 1924 New York.
Yeah. This is rough. I really feel for her. And again, we've got to get back to the a single woman traveling and all that kind of stuff during this time. Ugh. We've really not seen that in most of the series that he's done so far. You always clump up. You bring your sister. You bring your kid. You have more people with you, because a single woman traveling alone just spells an awful lot of trouble. I'm crossing my fingers for her, but I honestly, what I'm expecting in the upcoming couple of episodes is tragedy abound for Alex. That's what I'm expecting. A whole lot of being knocked around physically, emotionally, mentally. I think she's going to be a mess. That's where I'm predicting her.
So if those that think episode titles are spoilers, just fast forward about 15 seconds. But for the rest of you, just to let you know, as far as the dread you're feeling, episodes 2 and 3 of the season are called, episode 2 is called Rapist is Winter.
Shut up.
And episode 3 is called Wrap Thee in Terror.
Oh my God.
So not great.
Not great. Not great.
Wrap
wow.
Thee in Terror, for Christ's sake.
Yeah. When Rapist makes it in the title, I don't even know what to say. This was a tough episode, listeners. If you guys are sitting there thinking I did not remember this show being like this, I think that that's actually a pretty fair assessment, that this kind of clobbered me over the head. All of our characters who we're always rooting for had some really, really rough patches, and stuff that I was really dreading to come back, like the prostitution storyline, came back with a vengeance. And I'm like, oh no. So I'm crossing my fingers that we lean hard into some of these other things like Spencer, and get back to Whitfield and Banner in their more esoteric plans, not so much these bizarre, slap around scenes like that. I don't need any more of that.
Before I say goodbye, 2 little historical things that I wanted to bring up. One, going back to Luca. Luca says to Spencer that his mom basically put him on a boat to Galveston because she doesn't want him getting caught up in Italian fighting and Italian wars. And Spencer makes the point that the war is over, we just finished the war. And Luca says it's in Libya, it'll be in Tunisia and Egypt and Greece. What he's talking about there is Mussolini. Mussolini comes to power. His fascist military had already been around for several years, since the 1917 or 18, like that. But he actually becomes the quote unquote prime minister of Italy. He's appointed by the king as prime minister in 1922. Immediately, Mussolini begins his wars of aggression, and in particular, it's a conflict known as the pacification of Libya, or the formal name is the Second Italo-Sunusi War. This is what Luke is talking about. This is the war in Libya that's going on. It actually goes from 1923 to 1932. It involved, among other things, Italian forces and Italian military forces in Libya basically committing genocide in Libya, taking on Sunusi indigenous people, Sunusi renegades, and essentially committing genocide against the indigenous people of Libya for 11 years. And then in 1923, also, Mussolini almost started a war with Greece over what is called the Corfu incident, in which an Italian delegate or ambassador was killed supposedly at a diplomatic meeting, and Mussolini threatened to land troops, and I think actually did end up landing troops on Corfu and occupying it, which is one of the islands in Greece. So Mussolini immediately began running amok, and then obviously we knew he would be allied with Hitler come the Second World War. But again, just a little bit of history kind of at play and giving motivations for our characters that we wouldn't otherwise really be aware of or know about. So just interesting for Luca to point it out is, why is he on the boat? We know why Spencer's on the boat. So now these two being put together, maybe for Galveston and beyond.
And I appreciated that world building, remind us what's going on outside of America, remind us what's going on, bigger picture. I think that that's always helpful for us to place us in space and time, like remind us that we're not just a story, but we're like grounded in some reality. And I love it when Taylor does that. I think that is very good storytelling when he does it.
And I think it enabled Luca to give another Taylor thesis of there are two kinds of men in the world, right? I didn't pull this clip, but Luca says I think there are two kinds of men in this world, men who give and men who take. And I think he was using Mussolini as an example of men who take. And I think this world is populated by men who take. And I think all of our characters are dealing with that to some extent. So just another, in case you forgot where Taylor Sheridan is coming from in his storytelling, this is just another example of Luca's motivations for why he's on this boat. It's just another one of these trying to outrun men who take. And so many of these characters, I think, at different points are trying to outrun that same exact thing, again, just in different skins and different costumes. The very last thing, and this is very wholesome from my own kind of history, was when we get a shot of the men in Bozeman. It's, I think, the last shot of them when they see the phone booth and stuff. There's a giant billboard for Unita biscuits. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to eat Unita biscuits. I saw that and I was like 5 years old again. So I looked it up. Unita biscuits were introduced in the 1890s as a product of the National Biscuit Company, which eventually would become Nabisco. And they were discontinued in 2009. So I didn't remember it wrong. It was definitely something from my childhood. My grandmother would have like boxes of Unita biscuits. So I saw that sign and I was like, oh my God, like tickling the memory. It was just a very kind of funny thing to be reminded of randomly while watching 1923.
And I feel like I'm going to have all of that when we get to Galveston and we are like off the boat in Galveston. I'm be like, I've stayed at that hotel. I know where that is.
I was a flapper at that bar.
Yeah, exactly. It's all going to feel very familiar.
Well, we're back. We'll be back. And this next couple episodes should be more timely than this one was, but we were a little late getting our screeners. So, I hope you guys are enjoying the ride with us. And just keep listening to us.
I had a great time discussing this episode. I was very nervous about discussing it. I'm going to be honest with you. I felt like this one was going to be really rough. And in everything that I read of other people's sort of reactions to things, I was like, please let us be able to have a very good conversation about this. So I'm glad we did. And I'm really looking forward to some of these new plot lines that seem to be opening up. I'm ready to launch into this second season with like a lot of new ideas. So here's hoping. This is Caroline.
And this is Mike. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Yellowstone Podcast 1923 and all of the Pod Clubhouse podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, if you could leave us a 5-star review, we would appreciate it. I actually have a couple that I'll read in the next episode. I have a couple that were very not nice and that I'm not going to read, but there were some very nice ones left for us over the years, especially since the last episode of this aired. So I'll get to those next week. I forgot to pull them up. But thank you guys for listening. We do this because we want to discuss the show, but we do it because we want to interact with you too. So definitely leave us a 5-star message, a question, if you have a comment. If you just want to share what you think is happening in the show, you could reach us on our website. You could reach us on Apple and Spotify podcasts. You could reach us at Instagram at Pod Clubhouse. You could reach us on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, at Pod Clubhouse. I think we're on Blue Sky or in Threads, but I actually have to get those addresses. I'm not sure of them, but we would love to hear from you. And thank you guys for listening.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.
Pod Clubhouse.